Okay, everyone, it's 1:30. I think there's still maybe one or two people striking in, but I think it's time to begin this penultimate session of the First Research Data Alliance Plenary. My name is Kevin Ashley. I'm from the Digital Curation Centre at the University of Edinburgh. My role in this session has been described as facilitator. You'll see there are some folks here, all of whom you'll recognise they've been speaking to already. They are the people who've really been pulling together a lot of the organisation that has become the RDA. I'm an independent bystander, as it were, a participant, as one phrase we used, an interested observer, which is why I've been asked as a neutral person, as it were, to facilitate the discussion we're going to have. Before we get into the meat of that, though, I've been asked, as it were, a message from our sponsors to remind you again about the survey, which is now available from the RDA homepage. That's up here on the screen. You can see that the link is just there now above the link about the press release. It's really helpful if you can answer that to say what you did like and what you didn't like about how this event has gone. That's going to inform the organisation of the next event in Washington and indeed the events thereafter. And those who are involved in organising that would be very, very grateful to, we don't want to repeat mistakes. And what we also want to do is we want to repeat the things that did work well. So don't just complain about what didn't work, but tell us about, that was really good and I hope you do that again next time. Okay, enough about the survey. We have then an outline agenda for how we're going to deal with the rest of this afternoon. I'll describe that in a moment. Before I do, I'll just make two observations about today. Is a special day in two different ways. It's the Persian New Year, something that's timed to coincide with the vernal equinox, the beginning of spring, a time of happiness and renewal. In general, the spring equinox was today. Let's see if we can continue in that vein. Even more so, today is designated by the UN as World Happiness Day. That should be something that we want to contribute to World Happiness Day. There may well be contentious issues that we're going to discuss in the next hour, so we may all be in agreement. But let's see that whatever it is we're discussing, however we're dealing with this, that we can do it with a smile and in a spirit of cooperation, and perhaps leave just a little bit happier than when we came. I think that's the aim of this. So, I've described the purpose of what we're doing now, which is to discuss issues around the governance and the organisation of RDA itself. There are some draft documents which contain some questions to us, questions that the people putting this together could not yet resolve. That's why they're here. In a sense, if there are things that we don't understand about what they've drafted, we can ask them these questions. We may need to get them to expand on their thinking behind some things. But before we get on to discussing those documents, I think in very broad terms we need to think about, okay, we've all got together, we've had some discussions about interest groups and working groups and collaborating with our organisations. What next, perhaps? What next for us as individuals? What next for RDA as the organisation? And then after we've done that, we then move on to the documents. We then try and pick up any other issues that people are concerned about regarding the organisation itself that we haven't already dealt with. And by that point, I think we'll be ready to hand over to the final session of the day, and Saeed announcing the next event. So to begin that what next, Fran, I think, and others have made a fairly impassioned plea for the fact that what's clearly critical is to set up some of these other organisational bodies. And at the moment what's proposed is that amongst the organisational bodies that we set up is this thing called the Technical Advisory Board. That's really got to be there to try and manage that process of the working groups, of the interest groups, ensure that we don't have destructive overlap. I mean, sometimes it's constructive, I think, to have some types of overlap between them. It's clearly something that the folks involved in this so far have been doing effectively a whole bunch of different jobs to do with the organisation together. They're desperate to start delegating, to start handing off some of that to other people. That's why there was a plea to sign up. Perhaps I've got to ask, how many of you have signed up for interest either in the process of setting up that technical advisory board or to serve on it? Okay, a few hands already. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is a beginning, possibly not enough. Possibly means we need a few more. And this message is not just to those of you physically in the room. I should be keeping an eye on the Twitter stream again to see if any virtual hands have gone up. I'm not sure I can manage that with them without the glasses at the same time. So perhaps we should get on to any concerns that any of you have about this proposed organisation, which involves a number of different boards of different types, a council, a secretariat. And I know that there's been very little discussion, I think, on the forums themselves about the pros and cons of this document, but I have heard opinions expressed in conversation that not everyone is totally at ease with the organisational structure that's being proposed. And I wonder if anyone wants to elaborate on that, or indeed, so Bill, I can see.
First of all, to preface it with, I think I've read the document several times now, and I think everyone is really to be congratulated for coming up with a set of guiding principles that I think are just phenomenal for developing a really strong organization for the long term. I'm especially impressed with the principles related to openness, building consensus, and there's one statement in the preface materials that I thought was really quite compelling to me as an individual, which is that individual members are the heart of the organization, basically, and they can participate via discussion forums, interest groups, working groups, and so on and so forth. I do have a few concerns or suggestions which I would like to throw out there. First of all, if in fact individuals and working groups really are the heart of the organization, then I think we need more face time. This meeting in particular, I came in a little bit skeptical, and because, you know, I go to a lot of meetings, and I've sort of come up with a dichotomy. There are two types of meetings, one where you get talked to, and one where you actually participate and walk away and feel like, wow, I was really productive at this meeting. And personally, and I don't know how many people agree with me, I felt that the time when I was really productive here was in the 1 or 2 hours when I was in the working groups. And I hear a beehive somewhere. Yep. So I think if the working groups really are key to the success of RDA, then maintaining that and building upon the enthusiasm and excitement that were part of the discussions that I was part of, I think is going to be really key. And that means flip-flopping, I think, the order or the amount of time that's allotted in future meetings to working groups as opposed to talking head presentations. So I think we had about 4 hours maybe of working group activities, of which of that, I think only 2 were 3 hours in length, and most of the others were 1 or 2 hours in length. I snuck into 3 of them. One of the working groups, unfortunately, we had basically enough time to introduce one another, put out maybe 2 quick ideas, and then we got kicked out of the room. So we really couldn't build upon that enthusiasm. So again, I think the next time if we can allot a lot more time for working groups, I think that will be very helpful. Okay.
I wonder, because I know you've got a lot more points there, Bill, but I suspect that is a really easy issue to deal with. Do you mind if I stop you at that point? Sure. So I don't think I even need to really ask if anybody else agrees with what Bill has said there, because you indicate, well, many of you indicated your agreement. I mean, does anybody disagree? That's, you know, hum now your disagreement, a deafening silence. So you've got full support there. So this is something that we've already talked about, that I had this assumption that this event was different in nature from the rest, and I just assumed that in future the plenaries would be, as you say, much more about the getting together, the face time, the working groups. But we realised that there are a number of us that made this assumption. Nobody has made this explicit. So I think this is a question we can What is your view on this?
I would agree with the consensus, of course.
Right.
And,
How could we not?
well,
But it's a bit more than that. You're not just going along because they've told you, are you?
I think the idea maybe hadn't come across was that Monday was a launch meeting for RDA. It wasn't the plenary meeting. Tuesday and Wednesday have been the plenary meeting. So of Tuesday and Wednesday, the time was maybe 50-50. But, you know, we've heard the reviews of the room, so that's clear.
yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the next meeting in a little bit, but, you know, these meetings should be working meetings. So that means there needs to be working time.
Yeah.
So, you know, hopefully each meeting will get more towards, you know, whatever kind of an optimal configuration of time for, you know, getting together and different kinds of activities are. But I don't think you'll find any disagreement anywhere in this room.
But I think perhaps, I don't know if you want to respond to that, Bill, whether you feel your concerns there have been dealt with, or?
I think that's great. I think FaceTime is really critical because, you know, particularly when we're bringing together an international audience where we're meeting new people for the first time, we're trying to get people on the same page. It takes time. It takes time to do that. And I think I'm glad to hear the response there. And I think if we can, in fact, do that, then this enthusiasm will build and we'll see much more engagement from the broader community. The second point I had was with respect to communication. And I think others have been somewhat confused about the working group process. I think I've listened to Mark Parsons now explain the difference between working groups and interest groups and so on, and I felt like he gave a really very compelling explanation of the difference, which made me feel much more comfortable that people would be encouraged to be engaged and there would be no losers in the process. So if your first attempt at developing a working group gets shot down, it doesn't mean that, you know, you can't come back and try again until you get it right. And you have a mechanism via working or interest groups in terms of seeing a much broader agenda developed and maintained for the long term. And that was one of my initial concerns at the last meeting, was putting everything into an 18-month time frame really constrains what you can do. But if you have an interest group, you can take that and parse things out into a variety of working groups and discussion forum and so on. So again, I think communication is key. One of the things that I think would help with the communication, which I would throw out there, is that I think it would be really useful to provide written responses to those people that put in case statements and publish that to the broader community so we can see the feedback. Because those of us that have participated in writing case statements, we don't know what the feedback was to the ones that were successful versus the ones that were unsuccessful. So if we're going to have an open organization, I'm not sure why we can't publish that and make everyone aware of what makes for a good working group and so on and so forth.
So again, I wonder, because I think that's a very specific and concrete proposal, effectively around the process for evaluating working group case statements, and it's something that I only really realised in conversation yesterday that although everything else about developing the working group proposals happens in the open, the proposal is out there for public comment, at the point where the response comes back, so far it's been coming back by email to working group chairs. And unless they share it, and in general they haven't, except with members of their own working group, we don't get to see. As you say, we don't get to see why the successful ones were successful. We don't get to see what steer has been given to the ones that were almost successful and what advice is going back. So that's something where I cannot see any reason for that not to be open. I wonder if, again, any of you want to...
We think it's there. But
if it's not, it's a mistake.
we absolutely agree. It should. And one of the things I would say is that we're making it up as we go, and we want your help in making it up as we go. For us, it was really important to provide some response before this meeting started to the groups that wanted to be evaluated. So we did that faster than we would have liked, with less process than we would have liked, but we believe that the response to the working groups that asked to be to get feedback that it is available on the web. I'm just looking for our ubiquitous Herman, who achieves so very much. Is it there? No. Okay.
We agree with the principle. We should be there. Yeah.
Fine.
There was confusion in the triangle with the secretary as to who was proposing.
Yeah. So that's part of the response, but the other part, I think, is I've heard 2 rave reviews now of Mark explaining the distinction between working groups and interest groups. And if you would like, perhaps that could be shared sooner or later.
So I'm going to just and remind everyone, when we do speak from the floor again, it's important to wait until you get the mic, because otherwise those who are coming in remotely can't hear. Alan, did you want to just interject on that specific point?
Just one comment. I absolutely agree with this, but people need to understand that this, quote, the responses are going to be public, okay? I mean, you may have thought that you could send it in and you get a private response, but I just want people to understand that it's going to be open, so if you're criticized for what you're doing, people will see it. That's my only point. I don't disagree with it, but I'm saying I want people to understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let me just say what, the process, as Ross said, is we wanted to make sure to get responses to the first 6 before the launch. And so, as you guys know, the clock was ticking. One thing we did want to do, and I think that's respectful, is to let the working group chairs know before they saw it on the public access. So that happened. The next thing to happen, and and it will happen, is that it'll be out in public. But the other thing we wanted to do, because this is our first time around, all of us, including council, is to have discussions with the groups themselves. In the absence of this meeting, what working groups would do and the kinds of outcomes and impacts that they would have, in some sense, was even less well understood last week than it is this week, and maybe it's not completely well understood this week.
Stop me there, Frank. I think in a sense, I think you're trying to apologise for what's happened, and I think it's fine. I think we understand that now, and it's clear that we can and will do something differently in the future. My understanding is if we agree the structure that's proposed, the details of this process will be down to the Technical Advisory Board to manage, and it will be them in future that will be responsible for getting that feedback back. And of course, we're going to come on to those documents in a while. But I'll go back to, well, before I go back to Bill, I should just, again, get the feeling of the room. Again, we'll try having it. Are you all generally in agreement with the idea that process should be more open, that the feedback should be public? I haven't heard any dissent, but good. Any dissent? Anyone who feels that's not a good way to go? Jimmy, you had a hand up for both of them. Oh, you want to interject? Right.
I think the distinction I would make, and maybe we should just ask the question twice, is successful ones should definitely be public. The ones that aren't successful, maybe you want to give them a chance and not have, a response that says, oh, you've done a horrible job of this. You've really just messed it up. Be out there in the public. So, sort of like proposals. So, anyway, it's just a question.
Okay, so that's one view. I see more views coming in from over there. Do you want to, I think that there's discussion we had at this point. I'll come back to your other points in a moment.
So, my 2 cents, I completely disagree with the last comment. We're learning not only by successes, but failures too, whatever failure means, okay? So, unless we have some issues about sharing our experiences, both positive and negative, why would we cover one part of story? It's just, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so a broad agreement then with the openness, some uncomfortableness, but I think that we can agree then that this is, we've given, I think, a strong steer there, and we expect those who are going to be refining the process to take that steer. And this is still an organisation in the end that we own. If we feel that whoever develops these processes doesn't do what we in this room told them to do, we can certainly clout them in 6 months' time and clout them online before then. So, Bill, you have some more?
Just one last comment and a couple of suggestions. First of all, it I think is apparent to a lot of us that RDA appears to be top-heavy from the organizational standpoint if you look through the governance documents. And I say that from the perspective of being part of other groups and that have maybe the equivalent of a council as opposed to 5 different bodies as I count them. The council, the technical advisory board, organizational advisory board, secretariat, and the RDA colloquium, which was a new addition. I don't necessarily disagree that those may all be necessary, but my own perspective is from an emerging organization, I would adopt Occam's razor approach, which is you start with the minimum and then you add in additional organizational structure as necessary. And with that in mind, I would make a couple specific comments. One is the technical advisory board may in fact be necessary just if we start talking about dozens to hundreds of working groups. There may be a necessity to have that expertise. So I don't discount that as a potential real need. Reading through the governance document, though, I could not find any real compelling need for an organizational advisory board, quite frankly. I think you could easily have a quick committee put together or a task force to address a lot of those issues, give it a short lifespan so that it doesn't take on a life of its own and introduce new bureaucracy or organizational procedures that prevent RDA from being what I think is really the goal is to be an agile, communicative, and a responsive organization. And again, I just didn't see the compelling reason for the organizational advisory board. I think it's something that could take a life of its own and just generate undue bureaucracy. So that's one final, that was a suggestion that again, we reconsider the necessity of those, particularly the OAB in terms of whether or not it will really add to it, and it should be a lifetime board or council. I'm just not sure that that's the case. The second point that I wanted to suggest was there was the comment in there that the chair of for example, the technical advisory board would be a member of the council, which I agree with. But I wonder if, in fact, having a single chair for something like the Technical Advisory Board, which may in fact be necessary, and if it is, I would argue that it should probably have co-chairs, because in my experience, having critical boards or committees with a single chair gives you a really tight pinch point there. So if that individual can't make it to a meeting, and this is particularly the case for an international organization, then you lose that perspective. And I think having co-chairs for the boards or whatever are viewed as really critical to the success of each RDA, and having them participate directly in the Secretariat will help with the communication. Because again, I'm thinking from an organizational perspective, the more boards you have, the more councils, so on and so forth, it imposes a real cost on the organization from the communication standpoint. Because if those individual boards or councils are making their own decisions more or less in isolation, then that's a real problem. And in order for that not to occur, you have to really maximize the communication across those different bodies. And one way to do it is to populate those boards and council with, the same individuals.
Okay, thanks for that, Bill. So I'm going to come back. I think you've got at least some support there. I'm going to come back for a response in a moment, but before we do that, I'd again like to get a feeling whether anyone wants to add to those points or to agree or disagree. I've pulled out the structure for those of you that haven't committed these documents to memory. There may be one or two of you in the room. This is the part of the RDA organisational document, the draft organisational document we're discussing, that shows how these various boards fit together. So Bill's made a couple of suggestions that I'd like views on. One is very specific, which suggests that whatever boards or committees exists, we ought to have co-chairs in order to ensure that we aren't dependent so much on a single individual and that we can make progress in the event that a particular chair isn't available, indisposed, whatever. That, I suspect, might be something that's easier to get agreement on. But the other is more fundamental and is about the number of boards, and in particular your concern that the organisational board may be superfluous. So I think, was there somebody there with a microphone? Want to respond to either of those points? You want to make another point?
Previous point, if I can make or not. I want to talk about working groups, if that's okay. No?
If we could deal with this one, and then I'll move on to you next. Yeah?
Sure.
Yeah?
I'm very sympathetic with Bill Michener's points. I'm wondering whether the Organizational Advisory Board isn't, in fact, a temporary organizing committee that's done already most of its work and, you know, has a specific end date. It does, you know, finish off the organizing documents, and then it goes away.
So my understanding, and one reason why this might not be so from my reading of the documents, is that the Organisational Advisory Board is where are at the moment the funders who put the money in to make this possible get their representation. The intent is that the three who've started this off don't expect to be the only three involved. They want to grow that organisational representation, and they feel that there's got to be some vehicle for those organisations.
I think we should explain the idea.
Okay, well, in that case, you respond, and then we'll come back to the floor.
So, rather than saying whether it's right or wrong, let me provide the reasoning behind the Organisational Advisory Board. It's essentially to ensure that organisations as well as individuals have a way of influencing the research data agenda. And the thinking behind that was derived from the same thinking that occurred in the IETF world, where organisations were able to sign up to this, and that was important because it was organisations in the end who implemented the outcomes of the workings of the IETF that was developed by the individuals who were members. So the idea is that individuals may well be members, but organisations would implement the actions associated with that. So we felt that they needed to have a genuine voice in this work, so that if they felt that there was a piece of work or a whole tranche of work heading off down an unimplementable path, they might have an ability to say so. It was also intended to be a mechanism that enabled an organisation to join and indeed to pay to join. The funders are actually different, so the funders aren't intending to work through the Organisational Advisory Board. That's in fact the newly named structure, which I believe is...
that colloquium?
The colloquium. Is the intended mechanism. So we see that there are important influences from the funders, from organisations at large of many different sizes and shapes and forms, from many different places, and individuals who will contribute to the work of the organisation. That's the thinking behind it, and we were informed by the IETF in that regard, in that the Internet Society, which is the governing board sitting behind the IETF, had that structure. So IETF is very lightweight, but it can be lightweight because of other organisations that are being put in place behind it. That's the thinking. Now, I'm not trying to defend this or otherwise at this stage, but to explain that.
Let me add another piece of explanation too. You know, whiteboard an RDA in your own mind and When you think about the organization has to cover a number of functionalities because you want to support the working groups who are really the heart of the organization and the individual members. So, for example, there needs to be a group that takes care of kind of all of the kind of administrative workflow, the processes, the communication, the events, facilitating what's going on. You need some group of people somewhere who are doing that. There needs to be, when you do assessments of working groups, there needs to be a real technical context. You can't do this without a technical context. There needs to be some place for expertise. There needs to be some procedure by which you can figure out what are the working groups that reflect the mission of the organization. There needs to be a sustainable business model. So in 5 or 6 years, hopefully, us and 10,000 of our colleagues will all be here, and RDA will be self-sustaining. That means that in addition to whatever comes from government agencies and other kinds of things, there needs to be a revenue stream. That's another place that subscribing and partnering organizations can play. So when you start sort of looking at all the functionalities that are needed in order for, as you've whiteboarded RDA, there are a bunch of different models that one might use. And what we did is we were trying to come up with something for the governance document for you all to review is to look at practices of other kinds of organization, IETF, Smart Grid Advisory Panel, we looked at some STEM stuff, we looked at all kinds of organizations that have had some staying power and that have successes and parts of them that didn't work so well. And so part of what you see really comes from, informed by what we thought that RDA might need and what has worked for other people. So that's typically what you see in that diagram.
Okay, so that's a response. We're going to take hands up there first, and then I can see there's the next question will come from there. Yep.
I would like to come to the lower end of the organization, going away from these things in order that there is actually a need to organize 10,000 members or participants. First of all, I think we should look after the working group, that they have a way to actually work together. And I think we should heed the advice of Scott Brim of Internet 2, that there, first of all, need to be very good communication tools to communicate online with each other, even between face-to-face meetings. And I think that the forum as it is now is not really the most productive environment to work together. And I see a risk that the working groups will fan out to different wikis or so. So this would then lead to a balkanization of information, so that not everybody knows what the others are working about. So I see an immediate need to improve that.
Yeah. And I've heard that view expressed a number of times. I'm sure he's speaking for many people there, Hans. So before I move on to, are you going to respond on that same point? Because I think it's maybe worth teasing out. I'll come to you in a moment.
Can I have a really quick response?
Yeah.
We will be talking about the new website, which will be useful this afternoon even.
This is the problem with people delivering software. There's always something good coming really soon, isn't there? You know, I know because I've been there. I've been guilty. But, sorry, not to be facetious. So, can we take it, because this seems to me that there are two possibly complementary ways of addressing this concern about communication mechanisms. And I guess, I presume we're all in broad agreement with Hans that a balkanization, a splitting up, with each working group inventing its own communication processes would be a bad thing. One way we could view it is to say that in the organizational model we have, that the Secretariat, as indeed has already been offered, should be helping to put something better in place. Another view that I've heard expressed is that we could follow again the model of the IETF, which uses its own technical structures, working groups and RFCs, to remodel the organization, as well as to deal with the issues of developing internet protocols. And in that case, what we'd have is a working group about RDA comms mechanisms, which seems somewhat inward-looking. Is there any sympathy for that possibility? So, yeah, give us a hum if you think a working group on some. Okay, those who think it wouldn't be a good idea. A little bit more. But to be honest, I had the feeling most of you there weren't expressing a view either way, or you hum very quietly, one or the other. Okay, whether setting up a working group whose job was to improve RDA's own communication mechanisms to support the other working groups would be the right approach, or whether we just say, this is a job for the Secretariat, let them get on with it.
And you're articulating what communication means. Communication with whom?
So I'll just repeat that question because Salvatore didn't have the microphone there. Salvatore asked us to define what communication means. I was taking it in the context of the question that Hans had raised about how the working groups do their business. At the moment, we've got the forums and mailing lists. Hans is saying that these are not ideal ways to support the communication needs of a working group in between plenary meetings. And that if RDA doesn't provide an alternative, the risk is that working groups will go off and set up Google lists and wikis here, there and everywhere, and we'll have a fragmentation of the working environment. And I know some of the working groups have already discussed doing exactly that.
I just have
I did promise, are you going to respond on the same topic or a different topic? Because I can see...
back to the pictures on the wall. Back where we were before.
Okay, can I just follow up, because I think there are one or two people who want to follow up further on that topic, and then I'll come to you.
Point of order, though.
Yeah?
We were having this discussion about the, the structure, and now we're going off to other topics.
We need to stick with some, process, right? So
okay.
This one, if I may suggest, we can come back to previous and working groups, because I think
I stand corrected. You're absolutely right. In that case, you had the floor.
All right, so back to the pictures on the wall. This question may be premature, I'm not sure, but what changes the structure once it's set up? So my worries about again, I'm sympathetic also with what Bill said, but I worry much less about it if it's easy to blow away 6 months from now, rather than set in stone. Now, it's premature in that the organization has to figure out how to change itself. Of course, there may not be an answer now, but
yeah.
So sort of a question, sort of an encouragement. Be ready to change it, but think about how would that be? You're going to change it through humming in the next plenary, or is there some Uber group that oversees it? I don't have any recommendation.
Yeah, that I think is, I'm going to ask you to respond on that in a moment, and that, to my mind, I can summarize as, there's one suggestion that, we've got to start with some structure, it's not right, but don't worry, we fix these things as we go along, and I think your view that if we don't have the mechanism for fixing it, if we don't know what the mechanism is, before we know it, we're stuck with something that we can't change and that doesn't work. And in particular, if one concern that I have is trying to understand, let's say, the relative primacy of something like the Organisational Advisory Board, which itself is trying to shape the organisation, and these plenary meetings, who gets to override who, as it were, in the end, if there's a conflict of views. So can you respond on that?
I'm happy to have a go. I guess there's two elements of this. Is it the case that we need to have a body to represent the views of organisations is a question. And then if one does, is it something that gets locked in stone, etc.? My answer is that we would want to address the questions, are the structures working well? But overwhelmingly, what we will get measured upon in a year's time isn't the excellence of organisational structures, but whether or not the working groups that you have so demonstratedly engaged in over the last 2 days without enough time are actually delivering against the ambitions that you collectively have. So my view is that it would be probably a bad idea to try to do a formal review of a structure too soon, but every time I get comfortable, Chris Greer comes up and gives me a little poke saying, you've got it wrong, that's okay, keep going, but you have got it wrong, you will have to fix it. And so I do want it to be very clear that we understand that this is an attempt to come up with a structure to address the need that Fran was talking about early on. So I guess my sense is, yes, we have to get it right, and we haven't yet. My other sense is that that's okay, but I'd actually like to get a sense of this group, because I think Bill has expressed a serious concern that I have seen elsewhere around, is it too complex? Is it the appropriate way of getting a set of voices in there? So in some sense I wish to throw it back to you to get some sense. Are you comfortable to give it a go, or really do you want to say, well, you've demonstrably not got it right, fix it now, in order that the working group outcomes are as efficient as possible? Because I think the underlying sentiments that Bill expressed we all share in spades, which is that it's got to be something that supports the work of groups, and that those groups deliver value to the community. So that's the bit where we're hoping that works. But again, I'm interested in others' thoughts on it.
I would make an addition to that just briefly, if possible. I mean, we have a number of working groups that are working and interest groups that are working. This morning I said we have an urgent need for a technical advisory board because we have working groups working and they need to be coordinated on the technical side. At the moment we don't have any organisational members, right? So this discussion is a little bit theoretical. At the point when we have them, we believe, we put forward this model where they're going to need a way of interacting with RDA. And that's what that's for. But we're not urgently putting together the structure for the organisational board in the same way we are for the technical board, because it's not needed right now. And so, it's a very good point you raised, Bill, but I'm not sure it's the most urgent need at the moment, because that's some months down the line.
Well, before going back to that, I'm not entirely sure that answers the question that was put.
So, no, that was the first question. There is another question as well, yeah. Okay,
which is about, even if we accept all this idea that, it may well be wrong and we may have to fix it, there is this disquiet about, without sufficient understanding of the mechanisms by which we fix it, by the time you've got those organisational members, we may find it quite difficult to change. And in particular, I mean, my reading of the document suggests that the purpose of the Organisational Advisory Board is to advise on organisation, processes and mechanisms, the very things that we're talking about now, which suggests that the plenaries in future perhaps don't have as great an influence over that as we think we do.
Well, the
and that doesn't seem to fit with that spirit.
Version 1 still has to be written, right, of these documents, of what those things are. Those are the task forces that we want to set up as very short-term task forces to deliver a version, and then we can discuss with the document on the table with some concrete proposal on the table.
Okay.
I just wanted to add a comment to that, which is whatever model you go with, you got to get a little experience with it before you can see where it's breaking. We do that in our science all the time, and so I really, Kevin, I think we should be reviewing, because this is version 1, and version 1 implies there's a version 2 and a version 3, etc.
And I think everyone accepts that. They just want to know that there can be a version 2, 3, 4,
I think
and 5.
Yes, I think there should and will be a version 2. I think we should give this a little chance.
Fine, and we will go back to the floor.
So not to be the dead horse, right, we discussed right now, but you just, 2.5 years old? Years. Days. I'm so sorry. Days. 2.5 days old, and we're talking about something which you're gonna mature and reiterate and reiterate and reiterate. So let's not worry about that. What I would like to come back, if possible, this idea about working groups versus interest groups, because until we had this unconfusing 2-minute explanation by Mark, it looks like, 5 of us on this, the same table when Russ left. We were, 4 of us out of 5 were confused. So I would suggest, if that's okay, if you're going to give this very short spiel and unconfused, maybe not only 4 of us, but the rest. And then I have follow-up 2 short questions, if that's okay.
Can we put Mark on YouTube? Would that be a good thing to do?
So, can I? Yeah? if Mark can confuse us.
Sorry, what are you proposing to do exactly?
I'm proposing that Mark gonna tell us in a minute and a half what's the difference and how, okay?
The difference between?
Interest groups and working groups.
Is that, I think we're getting, we were going to return to that topic, I think. I'm not sure that we've...
Okay, fine.
I'd like to just, because I think we're getting close to the point that I'd like to put these issues around the organisation, the boards and whatever, to one side and feel that we've fed enough in. So if I can finish that off, and then we'll come to that point.
I hear you. So then very specific question to the board. I'm sorry, whatever you called, okay? So when is next time when you're going to decide that we're going to have 2 working groups versus 3 or 4 new working groups? That's a question.
So my understanding is you aren't going to decide.
Say that again?
It won't be you who makes that decision next time if we get the technical advisory board going. Is that right?
No. The question is, right now there are 2 working groups, persistent identifiers and data type registries. Am I right?
Yes.
Good. When next time you're going to decide on adding new working groups?
Yes. Okay, so we're just trying to figure out the frequency, and of course that's going to depend on the demand. One of the things we decided, although at this point in time it's conceivable it could happen more frequently, is this would happen at least 4 times a year because the council's going to get together face-to-face at least 4 times a year. It's possible because of the demand that we would look at that sooner. If there's an unending stream. Now notice that for working groups to be considered, it's actually a 3-phase process. First of all, there's a community comment phase, which takes 4 weeks. And I want to encourage everyone here because one of the things that I did, and I know that Ross and John I'm sure did this as well, is I looked at all of the discussion around the working group case statements that were submitted. I looked at all of the forum stuff and all of that just to get a feel for what the community thought. The community ought to be saying, and what I heard this morning, which completely delighted me, Jean, was that the community is now saying to itself, we kind of get what the RDA is about. This works, this doesn't work, this is premature, this is not. So in some sense, we can vet ourselves. So that's the first vetting. There needs to be an expert from the TAV, which is why I think Juan is absolutely right. The most pressing thing is for us to get a great TAV in line soon. And we have to figure out, how that election goes and who it represents, and those are real optimization issues. So the TAB has to provide some sort of technical assessment. This is good, this is in scope of the RDA, even though scope is big, this is not too duplicative with other organizations or other kinds of things, And then, in some sense, the council provides the kind of quality control for the mission. Is it aligned with the RDA mission? Is it concrete? Will it be adopted? Do we suspect that it would have, RDA impact? And then it's good to go. That will happen at least 4 times a year, possibly more.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So I have one more question, sorry.
Very brief, I hope, and I want to move over to here.
I'll try my very best. So this question was intentional because our community, like we discussed it before, we do want to do something concrete with you. And right now, it looks like the most reasonable way, most optimal way to collaborate, to work together is through working groups, okay? If we have 2 working groups, it's one story. If we have, I'm just making it up, 4 working groups, it's twice more opportunities to work together, right? So I understand your answer. So of course you need to, develop with your own pace, right? So, but like recommendation, wish, make it, go as fast as you can. That's what it is, okay? So, and then the last point, I would like us to do something very concrete. And we have already some ideas, and it was very encouraging with us spending time with our table and lunch. And my point is that this issue about having face-to-face interactions, again, what Bill suggested, is extremely important. And again, I would like to congratulate you guys because, you were working until this point very hard. You have much harder way from that one, but you're already on some point which is very respectful in your development. It's great what you've done, okay? Thank you.
Okay, so that wasn't a question. I just want to make that clear. Fine. Okay, Saeed, if we can have the microphone over here.
I think that there's actually conflation going on here in terms of number of boards and poor communication. And they are related, but they're actually distinct. You can have one board that communicates very, very badly, and you can have 5 or 10 that communicate very well. And I actually think, in my experience, the key is to have communications assigned to a person. You have very large organizations that seem to manage to have 1, maybe 2. In our case, I don't think you need 2 communications people. And I think probably in the Secretariat, we need someone who knows where all these conversations are taking place. So one of the interesting things about the IETF is it's a balance between order and chaos. Even if RDA provides a wiki, some working groups won't use it. We know that. They'll just say, no, we prefer our own group or our own wiki or Google Groups, and we'll use it. But you need someone who knows where those conversations are taking place, not to constrain them or tell them what to do. Then you need someone who can speak externally for the organization. So there have been blog posts and articles about RDA, but nobody speaks on behalf of RDA right now. And it's not a person who makes decisions or develops strategy, but can speak on behalf of the organization. And then there are professionals who do this very well. And they can actually do things like branding and logo development and so on and so on. I don't know if that skill set exists right now in the Secretariat. If it doesn't, I would really urge us to think about having it.
I just wanted to... Are you
saying this doesn't demonstrate...
Well, Andrew scolded me for calling it common. What I meant was ubiquitous. So I didn't know that was the logo before the meeting started. So.
Yeah. Yeah,
I really agree with this, Saeed, because I think communication, facilitates clarity. It facilitates so much. And this is one of the things we've been thinking about when you get back to the functionality. You need a communications functionality, both internal to the RDA and external. We want to get the messages for the science stories out, but also connects to the need for a sustainable business model. Because what you want is sort of full-time professionals who can help us do that. And, so then there needs to be a funding stream. So that's what we're trying to kind of think through, all of us now, all of these problems at the same time.
Kevin, can we get a sense on this thing, though?
About the nominated communication people, do you mean?
So comms, we all deeply share the pain of lack of comms. We will address that.
Okay, but there's a very specific proposal there from Saeed about however many groups and boards and whatever you have, that you have nominated people to manage the flow of information between.
We agree.
Yeah?
Completely.
So, but it doesn't matter just that you agree, does the room agree with that proposal? Yeah? So let's have a hand. Those against? One or two. So I might, but you wanted to get, what was the other thing you wanted to get a sense of?
I guess I'd like to address Bill's question of it looks too complicated, get it simpler, take away the OAB, because either we have a job to get an OAB in place or not. It would be good to know.
Well, and I wanted to, because we've been on this point now for 45 minutes or so. We've got about 45 minutes left, and I want really to wind up discussion, I think, on this point. We can give you a strong steer. So that the sense I got, and if anyone disagrees, then please speak up now, was that people are not entirely unhappy with you pursuing that route if they feel that the corrective mechanisms are straightforward, if it's going to be easy for us to change direction, if it actually transpires that Bill's fears are well-founded, and that we don't need this, or indeed at the points that Margaret and others made that perhaps the need for the OAB is short-lived. There are differing views on this, and perhaps what we need is the reassurance that it can be easily corrected, and it's not entirely clear, I think, to me or to anyone else here that that's the case.
So if you want a response to that, I guess the point of an OAB working group, if you like, a task force, is in fact to come up with a model that can contemplate its demise. But if it's a bad idea to have one in the first place, then we shouldn't pursue. I guess that's really the thing. I have made an argument as to why I think it's of value to have organisations involved and that they need a representation.
That was my point. I think the real fundamental issue is about organisational involvement. Should there be organisational members? Which probably wasn't understood by a lot of people from our document, and apologies if the document wasn't clear. But the document proposes that there should be organisational members. How does the room feel about that? You know, that's the most fundamental question.
So I can see that there's 3 people who want to speak on that. I'm going to come to you in a moment. Very briefly, I'll make another suggestion. You said that at the moment we don't have the organisational members, and therefore this is almost a non-issue until you have them.
It's less urgent.
It's less urgent. Is it feasible that actually even in 6 months' time you will not yet have needed to set this thing up? Because if so, then in a sense we could park the whole thing. Or are you saying that by the time you meet in Washington, you hope to have those members and therefore that structure will need to be... You are. In that case, then we do need to... So, Bill, and then another gentleman there, I'm sorry I don't know your name to respond to them, and then Mark. Yeah?
Kevin,
pardon?
do you want an answer to that question?
Well, I think I've got one very briefly there from mine, so we can go...
There was a comment down here, I don't know if the microphone is...
Bill,
So does that gentleman have the microphone? Okay, so, you then, and then we'll go back to Bill.
Okay, well, mine is very brief. It's procedural. I assume that as this is the plenary meeting, we will make decisions by consensus. Now, my question is somebody taking notes? And my suggestion would be, from our experience, it's then best that somebody types it and projects it on the screen, so we all have the same recollection of what was decided.
next time.
Okay. And I think that's certainly a very valid suggestion and one that we ought to sort out in advance.
Can I address that very quickly, though, because one of the guiding agreements that we made collectively before this meeting is that people would be able to participate in RDA fully, whether or not they're physically present or not. So it can't be the case that only the people who turn up get to decide. What we use these meetings for is to develop an understanding of consensus that gets tested more broadly. So it's really important to assert that this is the prevailing view that we have right at the moment, that this is not a decision-making forum, this is a consensus-forming forum to inform decisions that would be made by the RDA membership or participants as a whole. So those who are not physically here have first-class ability to influence the outcomes of any decision.
Okay, but I don't think that takes away that need for note-taking. But Bill, if you can respond, and then we'll go to Mark.
So, well, I guess I have a counter-proposal, which is that instead of jumping into forming an organizational advisory board, that a task force be appointed, like you've created a task force for the populating the technical advisory board, and really have some differing opinions in there, hopefully, and try and determine and better specify what an organizational advisory board would be all about. Because I've heard two very different opinions about what an organizational advisory board is from the steering committee.
Yes, it was on my list of things that I put up this morning. The processes around organizational membership is what I put, which is a more general point, but it would include how those members are represented, which the current plan is the OAB, but it could be a different one. So that was exactly one of the task forces on my list this morning. And please join. Have you signed? Please join.
Okay, so that's one alternative suggestion then again. Can I get a feeling of the room? I'll restate what I think Bill said. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, that your suggestion is that in the same way that it's been proposed to have a short-lived task group to help set up and refine exactly what the technical advisory board is and how it's going to operate, you're suggesting that there should be a similar short-lived task group to examine issues around the need for and the function of an organisational advisory board and the issues around organisational membership. Is that a fair reflection? Yeah. Anyone who feels that that's a workable way forward, hum? Anyone who does not feel that that's the right thing to do now, hum? Okay, I think you've got a fairly strong steer on that, but clearly that whether that works, this is not something that you're asking other people to do. That task group needs to be made up of the people who are in this room, or the people who are following along online, or other people whose arms you can twist and bend and cajole and bribe to do this work. If people don't come forward to get on that task group, then it's not going to happen. So I think with that caveat, we'll take that as a strong steer to you. So I think, Mark, you wanted to come in, and I really would like to wrap up discussion on these big issues around the boards and move on to some of the other things that we've got on the agenda in the final.
And Kevin, let me particularly encourage people to get on that task force who have some experience with other organizations and how organizational members interact, what kinds of checks and balances are in the system to guide their participation, et cetera. That would be very useful.
Most of my comments have already been made, and this last thing resolved I was going to make a similar proposal. But I do have one other question or point. I think the council's made it very clear that this is a draft document. It's subject to revision. The question is how? How is this document revised?
That's a question to
a question to the council, but I welcome input from everybody.
So the current state is there's a topic on the forum. When we issued the document, we set up a topic or an actual forum, I can't remember which one, but there is a place on the forum now where we've invited comments on this document. And then when we receive the documents, enough comments, we'll revise the document. Now, who we is, maybe that has to be a task force as well. If somebody wants to propose that, then we'll follow the proposal.
Yeah, this is just an organizational comment. We decided that we want to decide by a rough consensus, and now the session with an important decision is so late in the meeting that relatively few people attend. So I'd ask that next time we organize in a way that the decision-making session takes place when we have more representation.
That indeed sounds like a worthwhile proposal. For those who'll be putting together the agenda for the next meeting. Anyone disagree with that? Okay, we'll take that as a steer. So what I'd like to do now in the minutes remaining is move. I think we'll need to return. We had some questions about working groups and the way they work earlier, and I'd like to deal with that. But before that, there's one of the documents we've been asked to consider. If I can get my... there we are. I pointed to be. I'm working with two screens here in a way that I'm not entirely used to. So this is the draft document for how the Technical Advisory Board is meant to work. This is the thing that we need very quickly because it's meant to support the creation of more working groups, and I think we're all agreed that if in 6 months' time we've still only got 2 working groups, then something has gone wrong. We definitely want more of them by then. We definitely want to see more action. Now, although there's a task group that's going to be examining and refining this, there are specific questions that the initial organising group have set out for us here, and I think we can examine some of those now and give a steer to this task group that's going to deal with the Technical Advisory Board. So I've just pulled up the documents from the RDA website. Any of you want to be following along at home or here may want to do the same. And some of them particularly deal with issues about how one achieves balance of all sorts on the Technical Advisory Board. And balance can be to do with regional representation, it can be to do with things like gender, it can be to do with things like the types of skills that are represented on the advisory board, the scientific and research domains from which people come. There are all sorts of areas in which it might be desirable to structurally ensure that there's some degree of balance. But a firm view on that hasn't been taken. There's an open question there about which of those criteria we ought to be used. Does anyone have a view on that we can offer to steer the work of the task force? Keith, so we can have the microphone over.
Great, thank you.
And then I'll come to you next, yeah?
Okay, Kevin, 3 questions, answers, no, yes by domain, yes.
Okay, that's clear and concise.
Yes, my main point was on question 1. In the International Virtual Observatory Alliance, we have put as a rule that when someone is a working group chair, we have to make sure that there is no conflict of interests. So I really think it's important to have this as a rule. But
okay.
TAB members that are not working group chairs or interest group chairs.
And so that would imply, I guess, that anyone who is on the TAB who wants to become a working group chair would have to step down to do that. Okay, and that I think concurs with your concise view. Any more input then on this issue of balance and how it's achieved? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yes. It's difficult sometimes with a light to see the hands. Make a noise if I don't.
Okay. I'll hold in the future. With regard to the second question, I think the balance is important, but I think it would be far easier for some subgroup to define what those domains are and keep them to a relatively simple number, and then have people self-identify as falling in one of those bins rather than some chaotic process. You know, are you a physicist or a data scientist or an engineer or a physician? You know, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, okay, so the people self-identify. Well, indeed, I think it's the idea is that the task group that's going to define the technical advisory board will, if we're giving it the steer that we need that balance and we need it by domain, they'll work out how fine-grained that needs to be. Okay, so one response there, and then to Tim. Oh, no, you're just trying to put the hand up on behalf of someone else, right?
No, I'm
okay, right.
A possibility for 3 would be to have to require a quorum and have enough people that people could be members of working groups but would have to abstain from decisions that involve their working groups. So having enough people that you don't need the full group to make a decision.
Yeah. And can I just, why do you suggest that as an alternative? I can think of a number of reasons why you might want to do that.
Because sometimes people aren't available. Sometimes you might only have expertise in someone who has a real need to be a working group chair. There could be a variety of reasons why you might want to have some overlap.
Okay.
Hi, on the first question, if someone is on the tab and is also a working group chair, who is going to dare to disagree with them? What is the process for arguing with a person with that much authority? Second, consider, I don't know, we're talking about diversity according to buckets and specializations, but you really want diversity according to mission. You want to make sure that all of the missions that you're trying to accomplish are covered. So I don't know how you set those. You know, what are my strategic goals for the next 2 years? And that should be the way that you come up with the diversity you need. Maybe you don't need every discipline this time, something like that. And third, the number of members on the tab should be enough so that when you have staggered terms, you have enough people to preserve the culture.
That's, I think an important point. Yeah.
Kevin, can I ask you to get a sense of the room, at least, about the following, really about question 2. So there's 2 ways of going about the notion of balanced representation. One way is kind of a quota or a bucket where you have a set of representative buckets, whatever they may be, of various things. And so each time you guarantee balance because there's somebody in each bucket, however that happens. Another way is to have an open process where, say in a ranking, you don't take the first K. You might keep going down the list until you ensure, with some set of safeguards, balance. There's a number of algorithms in each space where you could do that, and the important thing for us will be the first time out, as we try whatever we try, to publish whatever that mechanism is. But Kevin, it would be kind of interesting to hear from the room which model seems like it will, get to our goals in the best way.
Okay, anyone want to respond to the question that Fran has set out there? Do I see, okay.
I'm not going to respond to Fran's question because I don't understand it. But with regard to the question of domains, I think I would strongly argue against taking domain into consideration at all in some kind of representation on the technical advisory board. The reason being that when you drill down into domains, you also recognize that there are a wide variety of interests and positions. And so, I don't think even in an organized domain like, let's say, bioinformatics, you're going to get the one person who represents that domain. I mean, there's too much variation there. And I would strongly urge that we look for people who are domain agnostic, but recognize the need for interoperability and exchange and applicability and adoption across more than one domain.
That's certainly a view I think will get some sympathy. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I think being exclusive and exclude people who know better domain than others is not a good idea. I think that we have to have people with different profiles. And not every domain will be represented.
Yeah.
We have to have a mixture of technologists, of scientists, of data center-oriented people, and to have them work together to build something. So I would feel extremely bad if someone felt as a representative of a specific domain in that game, because this goes to failure for everybody. So really, I think people have the right to be from a domain or from several, or to be technologists. But the core point is to try to have a mixture of profile to represent the different points of view, which are needed to lead this towards a technically and strategically sane path, let's say.
Okay, that's very useful. I think we've had a number of different ways, I think all suggesting that domain balance is not something that we're trying to achieve, but that there are other types of balance. It's been described as mission, as you say, as different professional groups, as people who are able to cross over these things, and we do want diversity in all of those ways, but not simply by identifying people from the research domain that they're interested in. So I think a very strong steer there for the tab. So I'm going to move on to some of the other questions in this document. Now,
Kevin,
there's one here.
Kevin?
Yeah?
Down the front. You're looking at
oh, okay, sorry, yes.
So I can, just before we move on from that, can I just raise one other aspect of balance? Very quick. We seem to have over-focused on discipline, and the document explicitly talks about many other. The one that I would like to get a sense of this meeting on is balance by region. Because RDA seeks to be an international organisation. That's why the logo the banner looks the way it looks, and yet we're wildly unrepresentative. So I'd be interested to get this meeting to give a sense of whether they think regional balance is one of the things that should be thrown into the consideration mix.
Yeah, and this is very specifically regional balance in the Technical Advisory Board, because I think that's different from trying to achieve regional balance in every single activity that you do, and there may be good reasons not to do that. Any people who disagree with it, I think the view that Andrew is explicitly expressing, that we ought to have some way of achieving regional balance on the TAB by a mechanism yet to be determined. Mark, and then I'll come to you.
I don't disagree, but I think technical balance, mission balance is way more important than regional balance.
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually agree exactly to this.
Okay, well, two views very much in opposition to that. I mean, it could be argued, perhaps, that there are, depending again what structure we end up with, that there are other structures in the council and the organisational board where it is important to have regional balance, but on the technical board that may be far less important than the issues that people have brought up here. So
just to comment on that, I'm not sure that that was opposing what Andrew had said. I think that there'll be several balances that will have to be juggled, and there'll be prioritized lists of those balances that that we might want to aim towards.
So I would just make a sort of organisational point that the more balances we try to achieve, the more complicated the process will be.
Can I just say, I think we need to move on from the issue of balance. So if what you want to say is about that, then I'm afraid I'd like to cut the conversation short and move on, because we could spend the next half an hour on this, and that, I don't think, that wouldn't be balanced. How can I put that? The next question we've been asked is about the voting procedures. I'm not sure that we can do something very constructive about this at the moment, but I'm willing to devote about 5 minutes to discussing this question of what type of voting procedure ought to be used to get people on to the TAB, and by implication perhaps some of the other bodies as well. Transferable votes, first past the post, obviously there's lots of voting systems available. Does anyone have any quick views to offer, particularly ones where you've got experience of systems in use in other organisations and how they've succeeded and failed? If not, this may be one of these things that's better dealt with, well, either just given to the task group to sort out or dealt with online with a bit more reflection. Okay, there's a view here from Paul. We can have the microphone down here.
Well, there's voting on different kinds of issues, and you have different. You may have a supermajority for one type of issue or decision, and
I believe this is very specifically voting for members of the Technical Advisory Board. So
well, just well, all right, but as a general comment on voting,
yeah,
you know, there are different levels of voting amount and for different kinds of decisions, and so you'll obviously have to have that. You have to think about that for the different decisions that are being made.
Yeah, and I think that's appropriate. And clearly, different decisions have greater or lesser impact. We're using a very informal system to get the rough feel of the room for issues we're talking about here. They're not the sort of things where we feel that we'd have to have a vote where somebody's counting and we have tellers, but there are things where that might be important. I think that's a valid point. But if there's no further, okay, there is some on the voting system here. Okay.
You haven't defined membership right.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think that's one thing I want to come on to.
How much will membership change how we view voting?
Right.
Okay.
So I'm clarified. The draft documents we have do define membership, and as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, membership at the moment by individuals, you get it basically by registering on the forum, I think, is that right? And you can relinquish it by writing to the Secretariat and saying, please expunge my name and deregister me from the forum. It's about as formal as that, but clearly, at the moment, I guess we have no real way of checking, for instance, whether everybody in this room who might have a vote on something has themselves registered on the forum, and maybe we need to do something more formal than that. But at the moment, it's like that, which is, I guess, a higher bar than participation in IETF, where effectively making a contribution of any sort gives you a voice. But I think it's
no, that's right. Anybody can join at any point. So,
but you do have to join. You have to take an action to say.
Well, we will have to put in place some voting mechanism. So you're going to have to sign up to register a vote. Yeah. And we'll have to have some text that when you sign up, I want to vote, you're going to say tick a box or something, and we need people to draft that text. So please, tell us what that text should say.
Sorry, you can just wait for the microphone.
Okay, there it is. For example, you have to have registered 3 weeks before the vote, something like that. I just wonder what you're going to do.
There's no suggestion of that at the moment, and maybe that's something, again, we can leave as the documents are refined, unless anyone's got any particularly, some horror stories to tell us that say we really need to do that. Okay, if I can move on now, I'm exploring at the moment to try and find the next set of questions. I was sure, in fact, there were more in that document, but I can't find them. So it may be worth actually, because there are a bunch of things here where you haven't posed questions to us, but I think they're worth discussing. So some of the stuff here is about that very issue, about membership and about voting. There is a proposal there about the procedures, that anybody can put themselves forward, that actually there's something like hustings that go on to give people the opportunity to ask questions of the candidates, and that it is tied in some way to the plenary. So in a sense, there's the opportunity to do this face-to-face as well as online for people who can be there. But the voting system is the one that we're leaving for the...
There is a question actually in my mind which isn't on there because it just came up during the conference. The document talks about electing half a board each time with them overlapping. On the other hand, we want to have a board that is representative as quickly as possible. So there's a question around, do we just elect half a board now and then half a board in a year's time, or do we elect the whole board now, in which case we have to find some way of introducing a stagger later? So that's a question that's implicit in that.
One simple way would be elect the whole board now and randomly deselect some of them halfway through.
But the document proposes electing half a board, and I think after the discussions here, we need more than 6 people now. That was the strong feeling I got. Sorry.
I was going to suggest exactly what you suggested, although maybe random is not the right term, but just put the full 12 in and let 6 of them depart in 6 months.
Well, when you say let 6 of them, if they don't volunteer to be, they may need to have the volunteering done for them.
I think it's not unrealistic for people to serve for 6 months during an intense period of getting this stuff started and then recognizing that they're going to transition to another working group or something else. I mean, there may be many reasons why people would be willing to do that.
Okay, I'll repeat that point, that decision should be made in advance. I think it was made from the floor. So I'd like then to return, we had some discussion earlier about working groups, about the mechanisms for supporting them. I cut some of that short because it was quite rightly pointed out that I'd allowed that to divert discussion of the wider issues. So I wonder if we can return to that now, if there was anybody who felt that they had further points to make around the mechanism to support the working groups, the decision-making process about that feels there's more that needs to be said now. You feel talked out on working groups? Are there questions that you have for the room that you want to pose about, or do you feel that you're comfortable enough with the process that we have now? I mean, we've made those suggested changes about how you do the feedback and to make that more open.
I just want to encourage the room to, it's day 3, so now we're almost 3 days old, and everybody's really tired. But this organization, it's incredibly important that we get going. And to get going, there's been a few people who, had the challenging, but, to see all of you at this place, thrilling job of trying to at least bootstrap it into something that is a good starting place. It needs many, many more people. If RDA is only 8 people or 11 people or 20 people, it's not worthy of all of our time. So we need it to be 100 people or 1,000 people. I don't know about 10,000 people. We'll see if we get there. What that means is that the direct next step is get involved in some piece of it that you care about. And then recognize that for any group we have, if you have even a small number of people, not everyone will agree with everything, but we can come up with something together, that will work. and we'll try to make it work, and when it doesn't work, we'll put in mechanisms, review, and changes to fix it. But this won't happen without everybody in this room getting involved in the pieces of it you care about the most. So I really encourage you to, when you've gotten a good night rest and your beer for the evening or whatever, to sign up for whichever group you think you can contribute to and help make our RDA better. Because really, at the end of the day, it's about an effective, impactful organization that raises everybody.
I support that, but I can see we've got at least 2 people who want to speak to the floor. So I'm going to Simon first, and then we'll come over here, and then to you. There's 3.
Yes, Simon Hodson, JISC. It was really a suggestion I very much liked, and I would appreciate, and I think it would be a good thing if Mark could give the so praised and eloquent description of the distinction between the working groups and the interest groups. And I think that would be felt to be very helpful. Certainly, I would appreciate that.
Are you ready to do that now, Mark, or do you need some time to get into costume or something?
We have to film this.
Andrew's getting the camera ready.
Yeah, after Bill said that I was very articulate, and then Jean, I've been sitting here sweating, wondering exactly what I said. But I think the idea is that interest groups are just that. It's a group of people who share a common interest. It's an organic thing. They come together because they share a common interest. As they work their common interest and they build to something more focused, where they feel like in that short time period that they can deliver something that is implementable, then they put together a case statement and go through the process that Fran outlined, and that these will be reviewed at least 4 times a year. And then if they're blessed as a working group, they have those 12 to 18 months to produce this thing, this implemented tool, policy, practice, whatever it is. When that happens, the RDA really waves the flag of that. The Secretariat, the Council does everything they can to say, look how great this is and how useful this is. This should be broadly adopted. And that goes to the funding agencies, that goes to the broader community. I don't know if that helps, but that's how I've been explaining it.
Okay, Simon, is that a response to this, or you come up with another question?
Direct response to that, yeah.
Right, I'll let you do that, and then I'll come to...
So thanks, Morris. I mean, I think that's very helpful, but I suppose an addendum or response to that is, what then is the useful structure and status of an interest group which will give it that capacity to pull out those useful ideas which can be taken into, that are susceptible to being achieved in 18 months and therefore can be the basis for candidate working groups and etc. So is there any status or structure which is necessary for an interest group in order to encourage that?
I'll handle that if you like. Not yet. What's very clear is there's a desire I see within this meeting for something along those lines, and I think we clearly need to respond to that. I don't know quite how yet, and I don't think it's right to know yet, but we would like to talk to some of you who we've already talked to about that and others around that topic.
Okay, if I can move then to question, yeah, you have the mic.
Yes, John Erickson from RPI. Could you scroll back to the membership? I was responding to there was a question that was called on the membership.
Yeah.
Thing.
So do you mean this thing that defines membership and who?
Exactly, and scroll a little bit further so we've got the
down a
table.
bit, up a bit,
right.
Down a bit, tell me when to stop.
And then reflect back on what Fran just said. And perhaps I should have everybody stand up, spin around twice, and then sit down again to get their energy going. This is essential. You know, to me, this is what this expression of what it means to be a member is pretty much all that fundamentally matters. Because I believe that regardless of what we have in terms of organizational structure, if we really want to embody what works in predecessor organizations such as IETF, that which really works, the organic growth of community, it's in the core membership principles, what it means to be a member, Can an arbitrarily small, representative of an arbitrarily small organization or research team play a role, get their voice heard, perhaps start activities? So you have to look at that from that perspective. Or does it require a membership, a paid membership of your parent organization, which is a disabler for organizations such as W3C? Those sorts of core questions. Also, are there any ambiguities to the mechanisms for tangible participation, the things you have, the process that you play, the things you have to contribute? I think, personally, this is a great start. You know, I'd like the opportunity, you know, through a process to provide feedback on this, fine-tuning, but I think this is a great start. I can see the kinds of small conversations and growing conversations that community needs happening based on this.
Okay, so in summary, I mean, I think that's, rather than a criticism of this document, that's a very strong endorsement of the membership model that's set out there, and a message that says, don't fiddle with this. Would that, am I summarising that correctly? And again, can I get some feeling as to whether or not there's a consensus behind that this is the membership model we want, that it's open, that it's not depend on where you work or who you are, or... Yeah, some said, some humming. Yeah, that's good. Okay. To the next question.
Hi, just to follow on to that, actually, I think a lot of good work has been done. And I really appreciated the comments that Bill made to kind of start off. I think it kind of in the right spirit, which is kind of evaluating this and seeing how it works. So I would propose that we ask the council to come forward at the next plenary with, to take these comments into consideration and come to us with perhaps a revised plan, or perhaps not, you decide, but that we then declare that an interim structure for 12 to 18 months or something like that, because I think the comment was right. We've got to try it out for a while and see if it works, and then make the changes afterwards.
Yeah.
And that also can kind of quell some of let us get back to the working groups, right? So create the structures, let us try them out for 12 or 18 months, and then go back to the working groups, do our work, and then come back later and say, okay, now we're going to change it to this.
Yeah, and so that's in a sense formally limiting the life of the app, putting in a review point now, at some point, I mean, you've suggested 12 to 18 months. I've heard other people suggest a review point at about 2 years, so we can argue about the exact amount, but that, there's been a lot of people saying that, yeah, let's agree now that we will go back and revisit that. Ross, you want to respond?
Yeah, I fully support the sentiments, but not quite the detail, in the sense that you were saying council go off and be wise and decide things. It's really the case, I think, that what comes to the plenary in September needs to be something that comes from the group who developed this, which I hope very much is drawn from the wisdom that exists in this room and elsewhere.
Does that group exist right now, or has that been proposed? Or what I heard was that there was a forum, that we could post comments to the forum, and that you would revise a document. So that's why I put that there.
That group exists and will exist in the task forces.
Yeah.
All the task forces that create these kinds of things go out to the community needs to comment, and then, you know, hopefully you kind of converge on some sort of consensus, and then that's it. So you know, we are us, you know, kind of thing.
At least 1/3 of the council is not that wise and really needs support.
And we need volunteers to actually write the text.
Yeah.
You know, there is text to be written.
That you want to hand this on to others, that others need to
So volunteer for a task force and take a piece of something that you're interested in and put a draft out there and see what the feedback you get is. So we need the task forces to do this work.
Okay, and see, Mark wants to contribute. And
just a quick comment. Something that was very helpful for me. I've only been in post for a month, so I'm still figuring this out myself. Was that the council is not a deciding body per se. It is a body that is trying to measure consensus.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the organizing group, and up till this point there was an organizing group. Now we're at organizing group version 2. And organizing group version 2 is really all the task forces. So you, as you choose to be, which I hope you do, are part of the organizing group now.
Okay. So I now have a question actually for the, I imagine for the Secretariat, and it's coming from the point that came from the floor earlier about, that we didn't organise and be explicit about a record of this meeting and the decisions. Can I assume that this is not only being broadcast but recorded? Can anyone tell me if that's...
Yeah, sure.
It is being recorded?
It is being recorded. There are 2 sets of notes, and we will merge those sets of notes. And of course, put them up the website.
Right. Okay, so all of those things are useful. So actually, I was worried that I might have to go through it, but the notes have already been taken, so that's fine.
And the
that's
recording will, of course, also be available so people can say, no, you are doing it wrong.
Okay, so I think then the one thing we need to make sure next time is that we say that before the meeting begins and not towards the end of it. But thank you very much, Tony. I'm very glad to hear that that was in hand. So, okay, Alan, I know you wanted to make a point. Okay, you want to do this from the stage about the...
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the council. As you know, we have 3 members. I was looking towards September and beyond. We think we need to grow it a little bit, so I'd like to basically ask for your comments, advice, suggestions about who else you'd like to see on the council. I will say one thing, the council I think does have to be regional and geographic in membership. I think that's clear as an international organization. We're looking for statesmen, people who have a broad understanding of these issues. So what we'd like to do is to appoint maybe 1, 2 more people by maybe June or July, maybe another couple in September. We want to get to 9 so we can then, it becomes self-supporting and we, the funders, are out of the loop. But if you have ideas, suggestions of who you'd like to have us consider, send names to me or Chris or Carlos or Claire and let us know. But I would like to encourage you to do that because we think it's important for the organization.
Okay, thanks very much. So don't step forward now, but go away from this and make sure you get those suggestions in on that. If there are no further points that anyone wants to bring up now, I'm getting the feeling that we're getting tired but happy, I hope, remembering what day it is today. So if there are no further issues that we want to discuss now, I think we've given a number of clear steers back both to the folks sitting here and to the task groups that are going to be set up that I hope some of you here and following online will be taking part in and volunteering for. I'll be making sure that I and my staff consider what we can do to help that process forward. I'll draw this session to a close now, and I'll hand over, I think, to Saeed, who's got a little bit something, and Mark, okay, to say about what's coming up next. Thank you very much for all your questions.